When we take down monuments of historical figures, are we trying to erase the history, or are we just avoiding the glorification of the dark parts of it? Stay tuned, and we'll talk all about it.
Shavinism.
Hi guys, my name is Yaron Shavit, and welcome to Shavinism, where every Monday we do a serious discussion topic and every Thursday is for comedy. Today I want to talk a little bit about the aftermath of Charlottesville. Not solely about Charlottesville, it's a debate that's happening around the world, but it's the way that we treat historical monuments, and specifically figures in our history. Not so much the neo-Nazis versus Antifa, because I don't want to talk about that at all, but I want to talk about sort of the core of the argument. For those that don't know about the argument is about a statue or a monument of a Confederate commander called Robert E. Lee, whose political opinions are obvious, if judged by today's morals, are completely wrong. However, it is a part of history. Those who want to keep the statue standing, saying that removing it is trying to remove parts of our history, and if we remove part of our history and if we ignore our history, we are condemned to repeat it. Those who want to remove the statue are saying that by keeping it, we're actually glorifying what the man stood up for, and if that is true, is that what we want to teach our children? Is that what we want to leave for the future generation? The legacy that that person has left. Now, I don't think I'm telling anyone anything new by saying that there are certain parts of history, specifically white European history, that are very dark. Anti-Semitism, genocide, treating of natives, colonialism, slavery. There are a lot of parts of history that we shouldn't be very proud of. But of course it's very easy for us today, standing 200 years later, and with different morals and different ethicals and a different society altogether, and judge people who lived in the 17, 18, and 1900s. One of the points that was brought in by this discussion is how to treat, let's say, people like Jefferson or Washington, who obviously were slave owners as they lived at that time, but is that really their legacy? And should we glorify it? How do we teach our kids about these people? Should we just erase the part that they were slave owners? How do we refer to the fact that they said all men should be created equal, but they didn't really mean all people at the time? On the other hand, we can't tell US history without referring to them, so we can't delete them altogether. But should we glorify them? Should we just tell the bits of history that we want? Do we want to control history? Should we have different people say their opinions about them? Can they even be judged 200 years later by today's standards? One of the points a colleague of mine at work raised, which I found very interesting, was she talked about the legacy. So let's say we're talking about what legacy did Washington and Jefferson leave us with? As opposed to what other things they have. Maybe we shouldn't glorify the fact that they were slave owners, but we should say that we wouldn't know the US today without them. But then again, how do we treat Christopher Columbus? Well, of course, it depends who you asked. If you asked Native Americans, they would have a very, very different view of Christopher Columbus as opposed to, let's say, me, who I grew up where they told me that Columbus discovered America. Obviously, he didn't discover America, it existed before him. It just discovered it for the Europeans that lived in that era. But again, how do we treat that? Do we erase that part of history? Do we tell only the bits we like? Do we let more opinions influence? Should we take down his monuments? Should we change the placard on the monument to say something different? And again, the question of legacy. What is the legacy that Christopher Columbus left us with? This is not specific to the US, by the way. In Ukraine, for example, they took down all the statues of Lenin, because in the eyes of Ukraine, the Soviet Union wasn't a liberator, it was a conqueror. His statues, by the way, were replaced with those of Bohdan Khmelnytsky, a man who is considered a hero in the eyes of Ukrainian people, but is also responsible for the death of tens of thousands of Jewish people. In Australia, there's a debate about Captain James Cook. We know him as the man who was the first to sail the 5 oceans and the first man to map the east coast of Australia. But on the statue itself, it says that Cook discovered Australia. And that's a big issue for the Aborigines, of course, that were in Australia way before the white European man discovered it. Now, I've tried to think a lot about these examples, and I also tried to think about myself. Like, I'm a Jewish person. How would I feel if there was a statue of Hitler in Berlin or Munich? I think I'd want it to be taken down. But I also wouldn't want Hitler to be deleted from history. I think it's very important to tell that history so we don't repeat it. The question also lies on how we treat, say, something like Richard Wagner, who is a composer, very known for his compositions, but also very known for having anti-Semitic views. His views were that Jews cannot create art, only imitate art, and his ideas were quoted by the Third Reich, and his compositions were used frequently by the Third Reich. So I'm asking myself, how would I feel if there was a statue of him in the middle of Berlin? Obviously it's not the same as a statue of Hitler, and he lived in a different time. He died 50 years before Hitler even came to power. Now I know there are certain Jewish people who would never ever listen to Wagner. I also know people that say, you know what, times have changed, he lived 200 years ago, his compositions are great, and his opinions are irrelevant today. The reason I'm raising this topic is because I don't think I have clear opinions about it. Because like I said, on the one hand stand the people that said that if we chop down all these monuments, are we erasing part of our history? Are we doing a disservice to ourselves in how we teach history? Are we condemned to repeat it? And on the other hand stand the people that say, well, a monument is a glorification of someone. We don't want to glorify people who had very controversial opinions and stood for things that we don't want to believe in, because it tells something to our future generations. And I think it raises a question also on how we teach history. How do we teach this history to our children? What should the placards on those monuments say? It's very obvious to me that we can't judge the past by today's ethical test, because it wouldn't stand. It would never stand. I'm not sure how we should treat people like Columbus, like Cook, like Jefferson, like Wagner. I'm not even sure how I want to treat the London History Museum, which has treasures from everywhere, every colony that the UK ever ruled, and was taken basically from those colonies. And I think my main question is, how do we teach the dark parts of our history? I think we should hear different perspectives about it, but I don't know where that line crosses. Because you kind of can't have one without the other, and we need to learn from our past mistakes and hopefully become a better society than our founding fathers. Anyway, I would love to hear your thoughts about this. I'm curious what you have to say. I hope it won't get into a racist debate, but you know, it's the internet and there's no minimum entry level for this. But I would like to hear your thoughts, especially because I don't know what my thoughts on this are. I really am honest. I'm trying to raise this discussion. I know it's come to light. I have opinions for and against, but I really am trying to figure out as well where I stand in how we should teach our history and how we treat monuments and you know, everything that was discussed in this video. So I would very much love to hear what you have to say about it. And I hope we all get along, whatever happens. Thank you very much. If you were intrigued by this discussion and you'd want to hear more, please do subscribe to the channel, like the page, comment, and I'll see you all on Thursday with something else. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.